Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, just to sync it all up.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's the official start.
Yeah.
Love that. Love
Yeah.
that. And this is obviously going.
Yeah. Well, the first one, Dex was like, oh, this is a clap, and I was really confused.
Right,
He
yeah,
was like,
yeah,
oh, it's
yeah.
just to sync up the audio. That's what the things are for
Yeah.
in the movie.
Nice.
I was like, oh, that's cool. I'm going to make a fun thing out of that from
that's
now
good.
on.
That's good. Yeah, yeah. It's like that thing when like sports teams, everyone's got their slight like a different kind of handshake thing as they come on board. Yeah.
The funniest thing too is once I do the video, like first video, I couldn't help myself. As soon as I clap, this thing turns on.
Yeah.
So it's like we got special powers.
Okay, yeah, that's good. I love that. Nice.
Yeah.
That's nice. The post-production.
Yeah. Well, welcome to Talking Dark Live. Very excited to have you here. Particularly because we talk so often, and it's funny to have people that especially with uni guys, that not many of you have been on my show, despite the fact I talk to you guys face to face more than I would.
Yeah, and we were probably some of the people that encountered like rounds 1, 2, and 3 when you were mostly kind of interviewing folks who were from your world outside of school.
Yeah. Yeah. So we got
nice bookend, right? Like I kind of like that.
It's really great. And there's a lot we could cover. We got myth making, storytelling, sexuality, monstrosity, gothic horror, theology.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to open with something you said to me the other day, which I think is a nice lens to kind of frame the rest of the discussion with. And that was, when anything transgressive comes into contact with institution, the transgression is amplified.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think it's best to open with this line, because as we wander through the different kind of areas of your picture making,
Yep.
each symbology seems to have a connection to that core concept.
Yeah. It does, and I think it's good. We've got a little audience starting to develop now. That you remember, like early on, I was all like, mechanics of myth. Like, how does a story work? What are the systems that folks use to kind of tell stories that like create ideas of transgression and otherness? That obviously never went away. It just got a bit sharper as the kind of project developed. But that notion of the kind of production values, like that being the sort of the amplification that sort of happens, that was always the thing that just kind of underlined the making. So I think it kind of makes sense to kind of frame things in terms of that. Like I just made really big drawings, big fucking excessive work, because that to me felt like it responded to the nature of what you were just talking about. That overlap between, like it's because the thing is, like, it's the cultural institutions often create the transgressions and then amplify it.
Yeah.
It's those things sort of happening at the same time, and I mean, I kind of I was really interested in the way that happens. It overlaps with my own experience, and it just kind of underscored pretty much everything I sort of made and thought about and did during the project.
And I mean, on that, I think one thing we talked about the other day that I found really fascinating was the difference a few years between us mates. Like in a society that is humming along pretty quickly towards its own destruction.
Yep.
It's crazy for me to think that homosexuality was illegal here until 1984, and not until I was 3 years old in Tasmania.
Yeah.
Like, that is mind-boggling for me.
Well, I was talking about this with a few other folks recently, everyone. Like World War II was 70 years ago. Like, the world just imploded 70 years ago. I just like the proximity, like the historical proximity of some of those like massive sort of cultural, social, sort of political things that you kind of learn about in a like as you're starting to sort of grow up. But I think you get to a sort of age where you start going, okay, like, hold on, some of that like only happened just a little bit before I was alive, or in the case of something like that, like completely overlaps with my time as a human on Earth. Like I keep thinking we're past that stuff, and then like
and then something else happens.
Something else happens.
Yeah.
You know, you hear that South Australia, I think just last year, finally repealed like gay panic defence laws.
Yeah, right.
They were the last state in Australia to kind of get rid of that. Like, they were still in South Australia a legitimate offence. Some old mate comes onto you and you kill them because you were so scared that they were a gay person. Like, fucking bonkers.
I mean, it's bonkers to think too how brief World War II is.
Yeah,
it's just like white bread Australia just formed out of 9 years.
Well, yeah, and the kind of legacy of that sort of overlaps with all the Yellow Sox gang stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, if
straight into.
Yeah, I mean that just kind of flavoured that sort of like post World War kind of 2 decades in the States. We had our own version of kind of McCarthy era kind of America.
Yeah. So what were the Yellow Sox gang, just in as briefly as you can put it?
Yeah. So 1953, Newcastle. Depending on what story you hear, 10 guys were charged with abominable offences. So homosexual, they were prosecuted for it. At the time that the court case was on, the person at the centre of that owned the menswear store and had a window display with mannequins featuring yellow socks and yellow neckties. I think it was autumn. I found that out later. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So like it's like this little seasonal sort of thing. They had no expectation anyone would buy yellow socks. Like it was 1950s Newcastle. Like that just wasn't a thing that anyone would get about wearing. Just a little bit of theatre. But the media constructed this urban myth that the yellow socks was this sort of sartorial code, this like codified call to arms that folks were using to identify each other, but also like it was part of this kind of like elaborate recruitment strategy. And if you read some of the media reports and also the court transcripts, like again, like thinking about that idea of like what we led off with, like transgression in contact or in relationship to institutional power. Like part of what caught me kind of initially about that story was the nature of the language. They were talking about this kind of evil presence that had moved into Newcastle.
That's what blew my mind too.
Yeah.
And because you were saying how you found parallel cases in the US that were like eerily similar.
Yep.
I actually found in looking up the Lavender Scare, that was like even more of an escalation.
Oh, that was bonkers.
I mean, I've written down here there was one government document called Employment of Homosexuals and Other Sex Perverts in Government.
Yeah.
What's a sex pervert?
Me, apparently.
But is a pervert not sexual?
Well,
can you be a platonic pervert?
Yeah, I know.
It's just craziness.
Yeah, and so that idea of there's this kind of just period where kind of the fear of otherness was just so kind of extreme like Keith was like a fairly prominent member of Newcastle's kind of business community, but he was kind of targeted because of that. He was quite, his store was doing quite well, but they saw him as kind of like the monster at the sort of centre of this group of perverts that were menacing Australia.
Yeah, I mean the fascinating thing in those studies in the US too is half of them have got Cold War in the title.
Yeah,
like they're being lumped into this, weird.
Well, that was the thing with the Lavender Scare. Yeah. Like they basically, I think, kind of a lot of the justification there was that if you were a gay person in America at that time, hiding your identity, and a person found out that you had a sort of alternate sexual identity, you were more susceptible to being blackmailed by communists as a way of sort of infiltrating like university sectors, government, like a whole lot of kind of institutions. And so the strategy they came up with was to like, let's just name and shame instead. Let's just completely like ruin the careers and lives of gay folks who were kind of working in those kind of roles before the Reds get to them and use them as agents for taking over American society.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I'd become a Soviet spy out of spite. You know, like,
Totally.
well, fuck you, maybe I will.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. The system's not really working for me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this next question kind of speaks a little bit to that, and kind of getting into your life drawing. There's a line I've borrowed from you more times than I can count, but I really, really like the term, and that's using your kind of realistic drawing that's stylistically appealing to an institutional crowd as a Trojan horse for the transgressive values.
Yeah, well, that's an inversion of the way myth operates as a thing. So as I said, I was sort of thinking a lot about signification and kind of mythic signification when I started the project, and I wrote a little bit about like Stephen West, who's a philosopher, who like great podcast channel, Philosophize This. Are we allowed to promote other people's gear on this?
Of course, bro.
Yeah, great. Stephen West.
I was trashing Janet Lawrence the other day.
Okay, yeah. It's always that thing, like how good's your editor, and can we cross promote? He kind of used that line, I think, that I kind of borrowed from him, that myths operate as a Trojan horse for values, a Trojan horse for ideologies. They kind of create this sense of like that's just the way things are. I mean, he obviously kind of, you know, when he's kind of talking about kind of semioticians and structuralists and post-structuralists who are sort of thinking about those ideas, he's going like, is that? Yeah, should those things be sort of taken for granted? But in my work, it's almost that's kind of one of a number of little inversions that I think I've kind of played around with. That somehow this like drawing flex, this kind of demonstration of a capacity to do a particular thing fairly well, which, you know, in my case is make a form look like a form, you know,
look like a dick.
Totally. All of those things. It becomes an entry point for folks who are probably looking for that in certain types of work. I think, you know, for people who perhaps haven't had, you know, as much kind of experience kind of engaging with art, like that becomes a way in. It becomes a way in. Like there's a sort of sense that like a thing is made well, and it often kind of is the conversation starter. I'm always like fascinated by what the kind of next level of experience for people is. You know, when they sort of wander into my space, I'm like, oh yeah, you draw really well. And then they look again at what's actually been drawn. And it's not to say like I'm trying to play a trick on anyone, or you know, because I think again, like that amplification thing is super contextual, and an individual can choose to amplify, you know, their response to something as well. So, you know, I think institutions get together and go like, this is a really massive thing. You know, the idea of a trans person, that's a massive thing. Well, is it? I don't know. In my own opinion, I don't think it is.
No.
It's just a thing that is. But I think individuals can choose that as well. You know, they can, and I'm not trying to. I never wanted the works to come across as kind of moralistic or never wanted them to be necessarily transgressive on my terms. I feel like people bring that to the work themselves if they do it all.
Yeah, I feel like that's more formed by the fact, you know, we're at NAS and you exhibit in galleries, and there's that framework that kind of dictates that, because you know, I agree with every bit of what you're saying. You know, people are all the same to me. There's no, you know, often this othering is more at the hands of people that don't know enough people unlike themselves.
Although it's kind of interesting with that, because I mean the other part of my research was obviously the monster thing, which you mentioned before, but and the monster as an analogue for a kind of other. But at a couple of points in my paper, I felt the need to kind of acknowledge that, you know, I have a kind of like a set of privileges is a funny term, but it'll do, I think, in terms of making my point. In terms of the way I get to choose how much otherness I present to the world. In the like, I'm some old mate white guy, you know, who dresses like a PE teacher. You know, I'm neurotypical for the most part. I'm relatively, you know, cisgendered. I'm not living with a disability. You know, my parents were both nurses. I came from a like relatively sort of stable sort of background. I'm just really conscious, and I felt it was really important to acknowledge that some people's otherness presents in the world in a way that they probably have less agency in you know, controlling. I'm probably, I mean, the running joke on opening night was like, you just don't look like your work. You don't. People kept coming up thinking like,
yeah, your personality seems at odds.
Where's the person that made this work? Because it just can't be this like just completely ordinary looking kind of old mate who did it. But I'm also conscious here that isn't the experience some other people have with otherness, and that idea that we can just go, oh well, you know, we see everyone the same. Yeah, from the other side of that, that's, you know, that's we still live in structures where people are absolutely pushed kind of so far out of systems, so far out of social structures, cultural structures, political structures, that, you know, they're the other in a whole other way. And so I don't know, I just was really conscious of that. Like I
think your work speaks to your personality a little bit too, and just like what you were saying before about, like, you're not trying to be intentionally transgressive. It's, you're trying to make beautiful pictures at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And that is an inroad to, you know, the theory you've involved your paper with the monsters and homosexuality. And I think that really speaks to your personality because, you know, just being your mate, talking to you every other day, there's been countless times where I'm really fucking negative and you snap me out of it, flip me into a more positive headspace. And there's, you know, there's even been things to do with big picture thinking that, you know, I've adjusted in knowing you. And so, yeah, I think your work really does speak to that kind of interaction you have with other people in the world.
Yeah, nice. I mean, I kind of, yeah, that's a really interesting one, and that's nice of you to say. I mean, I kind of, this weird thing that we do is, like, you know, making work, putting that work in the world, using it as a sort of point of connection between our experience and someone else's experience. Like I think about that a lot, and opening nights and VIP previews and gallery events. Like I'm all for that. That's our industry, and we should embrace that and lean into it, and you know, do our best to make that a richer, more meaningful, better supported thing in the world. But I don't necessarily need to be congratulated 100 times for making a drawing. I just did a drawing. I really like drawing. Yeah. I feel really, really lucky that I get to make drawings. What I'm getting at is, like, there was a couple of conversations I had on the opening night on Friday there, where we were talking about my work, but it felt like what we were actually talking about was something that was genuinely meaningful to someone else. And yeah, a big picture thing, or a positive spin on something. Like, it was probably, you know, not dissimilar to some of the conversations that we've been having for a long time. And they're the moments that were like, the bits I really enjoy are the making of the stuff, and then those little moments where, you know, it's not the pat on the back, it's the conversation with, you know, the family of a young person who is feeling a bit like another, and we can just talk about, like, we can take the hot air out of that via kind of talking about kind of, you know, some of the stuff that was in my work there. I love that.
Yeah, nice.
I love that. That's what it's all about.
Cool. Let's take a quick break. I've got to change over the camera.
Nice. Go.
Cool. So we're probably going to have to talk a bit more about life drawing, just because there'll be a mutiny if we don't.
Right. Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could address a little bit kind of the work you've done looking into historical process and anatomy, because You know, it's great to see you, you know, when I'm leaving in the day, you with your shirt off looking in a mirror studying muscles. I find that really fascinating, even if you know,
Yeah. No, that's totally fine. I was joking about my dad bod featuring in a couple of works up there. I've been playing a lot of tennis last year, so yeah, there's probably like some alternate universe where I'm 10 kilograms heavier, and those works have a different kind of presence. Yeah.
That'd be great if they're all swole.
Yeah, totally. I should do some lifting and yeah. No. I just have always worked with the figure. Was always attracted to kind of, in particular, a lot of Western art that sort of came out of that tradition. As you know, like I've been deep diving for a bunch of years into like all the kind of really hardcore like atelier schools around the world, the kind of the new romantic kind of realist sort of figurative kind of makers. Odd Nerdrum's kind of the one that most people have sort of encountered, Norwegian painter who's kind of, you know, contemporary Rembrandt. But it was really interesting kind of with that stuff, because as we sort of unpacked and had a bit of a giggle about, life drawing for me, you know, was, yeah, it felt like one of the sort of signification strategies that I wanted to use to like locate my work in relationship to Western art canon, Catholic Church, kind of some of the narrative signification that comes out of Hollywood, and also, you know, like the kind of like the self-mythologizing we do through social media, through something like this. This is me trying to make a little myth about myself right now. Like it's, you know, it. So yeah, the figurative thing was kind of really important to that. But like on a technical level, you know, it was one of actually the best things about the masters. Like I'd hang out with the third years all day, and Melinda all day on Fridays, life drawing for 6 hours. And then yeah, like modelling for myself when I got the chance, and doing. I mean, I think there's a real value from in drawing from actual things rather than found images. And like my work's always kind of a fusion of sources. There's always a bit of a hybrid, a bit like monsters. You know, it might be a source painting, but that source painting is then translated into like a little like plasticine and cloth diorama, which is then translated into a work, which I then adjust via, you know, looking at myself in the mirror, and or grabbing things from kind of other life drawing that I'm doing. But what got really interesting towards the end was like trying to work out like how I'm using quite a traditional representational sort of figurative sort of system within my work, in relation to the kind of kitsch, contemporary kitsch, kind of romantic painters, so Odd Nerdrum and the gang, who I see as kind of sitting on one side of this sort of contemporary spectrum of folks kind of using the figure. On the other side, you've got like the more overtly sort of postmodern sort of folks who are grabbing old things and jamming them into new things. And like I'm thinking about Chapman Brothers, Michael Landy, Jeff Koons, all the kind of, you know, usuals. But then that space in the middle, where there's like, I'm really interested in artists, you know, like Chelsea, who teaches here. You know, I wrote a bit about Heidi Yardley. Folks who I feel like are sort of, there's a genuine love of, you know, the materiality that you know is kind of inherent to that field, like actual charcoal on actual paper. You know, the legacy of you know, folks trying to mix coloured dust with oil and smear it on surfaces. You know, the legacy of folks, you know, hacking away at bits of lime wood to create kind of sculptural forms. Like there's an engagement with those kind of processes, those materials, the kind of accumulated knowledge that sort of comes with that. But those artists that I'm trying to kind of locate myself alongside, unlike Odd Nerdrum and the gang, aren't pretending that the last 150 years of cultural development actually happened. Like that's the thing about, like, on one side I think you just get this kind of old new, like, you know, postmodern, let's destabilize the old by the new, let's destabilize the new by the old. Then I think you get kind of the kitsch kids who are like, no, everything kind of post about 1850 is terrible. Everything great happened kind of, you know, well before that. And then I think you get folks who are in the middle whose work kind of looks like it comes directly out of that through line of kind of, you know, Western representational kind of art making. But somehow it's not the kind of anachronic thing that the kitsch guys are doing. It's not the kind of straight trans-historical thing that the sort of postmodernist kids are doing. It's something in the middle. It's more atemporal. It's kind of old and new at the same time. It's a little. I try to describe it as like it's a bit more seamless, and I don't mean that as a judgment necessarily on either the kind of wings of that spectrum, because, you know, there's like I love a Bouguereau, I love a Proudhon, you know, I love Odd Nerdrum. I mean, I'm kind of slightly repulsed by them, but I'm also like I kind of really love that. And, you know, Michael Landy's one of my favourite artists. I mean, I think the Chapman brothers are probably losing a little bit of steam, but I was really interested in kind of, you know, their sort of heyday. But yeah, just those artists that are in the middle. I kind of the life drawing was me engaging with that part of what I think is a really interesting contemporary field.
Yeah, I think even like just talking to TC this morning, how she was talking about deep time and how being aware of, you know, the complete process that formed the earth and developed life.
Yep. How
having that awareness of, you know, the big picture changes the way you operate in your small tasks, and like in a more enclosed, artful way. I feel like that kind of speaks to it a bit.
Yeah, that's nice.
I agree that I really find, like, a lot of the work at White Rabbit does this for me. There's a technical mastery that, matched with contemporary materials and sensibilities, I just, you know, melt over.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, right? And this is like, I know the tiniest little bit about this, but it's really interesting the way, like, geographically some of those traditions have shifted around the world. So I think a lot of that kind of French academic stuff went east and kind of ended up in
Japan in the 1860s.
Well, I was more thinking like it hit Russia. So some of the kind of like the kind of realist, you know, like sort of, you know, schools. Like I know someone who owns or runs a sort of like an atelier sort of academy down in South Australia, and he goes to Russia to get his fill of like really hardcore, you know, like realist French academic kind of stuff. Yeah. Because that just the kind of that as an educational system has kind of located itself there, and in turn, I think some of that sort of Soviet era sort of stuff that's influenced a lot of Chinese artists. So when I was in China a few years ago, and again, like, China's a massive, incredibly sort of complex culture and history, and like I'm again a white mate talking about things I don't really understand, but we got the opportunity of visiting a couple of art schools in Jinan, up in the kind of northeast, I want to say. And yeah, you could see, like, even in the galleries there, you were looking at Chinese painters, but also the other works that were collected were Russians.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and like these kind of realist paintings. You're kind of in this gallery in you know, the northeast of China, looking at this kind of like scene of like a European winter with like this muscular white guy about to chop some wood. I'm like, who the hell made this? And yeah, I just think there's a really interesting kind of like, I love White Rabbit. There's a really some fantastic collection, and you know, such a great thing that we get to have 20 minutes down the road.
It's unreal.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know this didn't make your paper, but it kind of bleeds into what we were laughing over ages ago about the Arc Academy. Is that what it was called?
Yeah, so the Art Renewal Centre, bless them.
What do you make of all that?
Well, I mean, that Trojan horse thing, you know, I kind of, and things being sort of Trojan horses for kind of ideologies, like that's the repulsion bit when it comes to looking at artists kind of associated with that particular field. There's this, I love it, and you know, I think it's you know, it's in a lot of ways it's the way I make work, but it comes with this kind of coded well, not even coded, it's pretty overt. Like you read the mission statement, like the philosophy of the Art Renewal Centre. Just trying to think of the guy's name. He's a leading specialist on Bouchereau, but Fred Ross, I think it might be. It's basically like modernism and postmodernism bad. You know, sad child that looks like sad child, good. You know, it's this kind of, I don't know, this weird populist thing that I think just trips over its own logic, just in such a sort of blatant way. You know, it really, the idea of like any form of like indexical signification, it's just like no. It's got to the iconic's got to look like the thing, and then you can use a couple of symbols to, you know, so you know, the sad girl looks like a sad girl, and she's, you know, indicative of all sadness in the world. I don't know. I just think that's I just find that stuff really limited. Limited. It just doesn't. I always tell this story of like a couple of painter mates of mine. Well, one's a really good friend. The other's someone I kind of worked with a little bit. Both fantastic painters. One of them will tell students this is the way to make a painting. The other, who paints in a very similar way, will tell a student there's 10,000 different ways to make a painting. And I just, you know, I just think we should always remain curious and open stuff. So I think the moment we play that sort of ideological game of it's this and everything else is not a thing, or not a thing that's kind of, you know, worth anything, we're in some trouble.
Yeah. Well, I think as well, like everyone.
God, I'm old man River. I'm so sick of.
So sick of talking about yourself.
Yeah. I feel like it's been 2 years worth of like me on a fucking high horse going like, you know, high wisdom score, you know, not very bright, but you know, sorry. Anyway.
It's too funny.
Yeah.
But no, like I agree with what you're saying in that. I mean, I was talking about this with Melinda yesterday. That I mean, like, look at someone like Kate. What she did was very, very different, but that methodology was all her own. Like, you could teach a whole school of people to do that. Yeah. But you know, if you're not open to new experiences, what's the point?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I strategically was teaching teenagers all week, so I didn't have to stress about any grad show stuff this week. Perfect. It was so good. And yeah, just the whole week I was just saying, like, don't tell me you've got a style. I can't. That absolutely does my head in. You know, just.
Styles for someone else to pick up on.
Just take a risk and see what happens, and then take another risk and see what happens, and then take another risk and see what happens. Like, I don't know, and then just work really, really bloody hard. Like, just, you know, stay in that open, curious state, and then just work really, really bloody hard.
I guess to wrap up, you know, I really like the words you had the other day about teaching, because I asked you, you know, as someone that may not see much visual correspondence between your teaching and your drawing, I'm curious to know what itch that teaching scratches in your overall practice.
Yeah, I've spoken about this a couple of times with other folks. Art does that funny thing, right? And I know, like, we've had bits of this conversation where it feels really meaningful, and then it just feels like
dead.
Well, yeah, or for me, it felt somewhere between an indulgence and something that was just devoid of any genuine value in the world. You know, like it felt like
an ability to make much of a difference.
It might have had some commercial value, but that was about it. It just didn't. It was that. But for me, like the teaching that I've done over the last, I don't know, what are we talking now, like sort of 15, 16 years, has always kept me really connected to the idea that art is that thing that is a way of connecting my experience to your experience. You know, your experience to someone else's experience, their experience to someone else's experience. Like it has as a provocation for you know a sort of, you know, a more complex and nuanced sort of connection with another person. You know, it allows for that. It elicits that. You know, I just, teaching has always allowed me to be in the studio by myself doing this weird thing that we do, and feel like I'm actually making the most of my time. Because, you know, my studio practice, I think, makes me a better teacher, and I think my teaching practice makes me a better studio practitioner. I think it just, those things kind of go hand in hand.
Feed into each other. Yeah,
and I mean, I don't know, we've got someone here in the audience who might just go, bullshit, but I'd like to think when I'm teaching, like, I'm pretty flat. You know, bit like I was saying with those two painters, you know, that here's a way to do a thing and that's the only way to do a thing. I hope I don't teach like that, and I don't think I do. I think the guru thing gets really problematic. It was one of the best things about having a studio here whilst I was also doing a bit of teaching was that people could see me struggling, because that's like, you know what I mean by flat? Like
it breaks that wall a little bit.
The best classes I've had are the ones where, you know, you just almost just set the thing in motion, and you know you share as much of the limited amount of knowledge you have with other people, and you just help build this kind of collective, you know, experience of everyone's knowledge together.
And I believe that is how you kind of run your classes, because I came and visited you up in that shitty old annex one day. And it was really cool getting to, you know, we walked around and talked about the students' works, and you kind of gave a few thoughts of what you might try and suggest. And yeah, there was this sense that you did throw yourself into what the student was doing. There was no kind of forcing your agenda onto the work. Yeah, for sure. But even just like I just. Part of it maybe is that, without throwing other institutions under the bus, my experience of uni was one where I didn't really get a sense of my teachers how to practice. And kind of the extension of that was that, like, well, I don't know, I see you briefly, you present a thing, you then sort of take off, I don't see your work anywhere, I don't know, I just felt very disconnected to, you know, I'm trying to be an artist, I've got the sense that you are an artist, but I'm not really sure how we're bridging that gap. You know, I'm just trying to make that leg straight, and I'm just hoping Marianne Coots doesn't come past and tell me that, you know, you've got it all wrong and you need to rub the whole thing out and start again, because that has happened countless times when I was kind of working. Like you can't dispute it either. She's always right.
No. There was a couple of people I always trusted. She was definitely one of them. If she said something, I would do it. But yeah, it was. I think it was always good just to kind of try and work from that perspective. And, you know, like teaching's, it's a weird thing. You know, you're up there. Like it's an inherently arrogant gesture, I think. You know, you're up there going, I have knowledge, you all don't have knowledge. Let me demonstrate my knowledge somehow. But I think, again, I think I've gotten better, and it wasn't always the case. I was like classic kind of smoke and mirrors kind of educator trying to pretend I knew everything. Someone would mention an artist and I'd be like, oh yeah, I've definitely heard of that. Google it later. You know. after a while, I just kind of let go of all of that and went like, it's fine for me not to know. I know my little chunk, and you know, everyone else will just kind of contribute to that.
It's a very freeing thing to realise, because I mean, I play the part of the dead shit, you know.
Sure.
And once you just say, "Oh, I'm an idiot," you know,
yeah.
It's a lot easier.
Well, yeah, and you know, like do you know? They just on that. I think I recognise good advice. You know, one of the things I think I've always done is just recognise the wisdom in other people, and yeah, I you know, so much of my teaching is just a mashup of great advice I've been given by someone else. I'm just like, yeah, that's great, and I'm just a conduit for just these kind of streams of knowledge that have overlapped with my little experience of trying to do my own thing, that I can just pass on to other people. And I think my radar for what's good advice and perhaps what's not as useful, and also, like, I'd like to think that that there's a sensitivity to when the advice gets delivered. I think sometimes that can be key. It's now's the moment to push, now's the moment to kind of cradle, now's the moment just to leave someone alone. Yeah,
cool. Thanks, bro. I think the camera's just gone off.
Oh,
so
click. Yeah, dead.
cut that there.
Yeah, nice.
Sure, we'll talk more in the future.
Yes. Yeah.
Cheers, bro. It's been good.
Thanks.